Africa is a continent of immense natural wealth. It boasts vast reserves of oil, diamonds, gold, coltan, and other precious resources. Yet, paradoxically, it remains one of the poorest regions in the world. This stark contrast between resource abundance and widespread poverty is known as the resource curse. For decades, Africa's natural wealth has been plundered, mismanaged, and squandered, leaving its people impoverished and its environment degraded. This essay will delve into the complex web of factors that perpetuate this curse, examining the roles of corrupt leaders, multinational corporations, and systemic failures in governance. The roots of the resource curse can be traced back to the colonial era, when European powers exploited Africa's resources for their own gain. This legacy of extraction and exploitation continued after independence, with many African nations falling prey to corrupt dictators and predatory foreign companies. The Cold War further exacerbated the situation as superpowers vied for influence by propping up authoritarian regimes and fueling conflicts over resources. Today, globalization has intensified the resource curse, integrating Africa's resources into global markets while often failing to benefit local populations. The demand for Africa's oil, minerals, and timber fuels a globalized system of extraction and consumption that often prioritizes profit over people and the planet. This system is sustained by a complex interplay of factors, including weak institutions, corruption, and a lack of transparency and accountability. The consequences of the resource curse are devastating. It fuels poverty, inequality, and conflict. It undermines democracy and good governance. It destroys ecosystems and exacerbates climate change. Breaking this vicious cycle requires a fundamental shift in how Africa's resources are managed and governed. The resource curse thrives on corruption and exploitation. Corrupt leaders, often in cahoots with unscrupulous business people, siphon off the wealth generated by natural resources, leaving their citizens mired in poverty. These individuals operate like a looting machine, extracting wealth for personal gain while neglecting the needs of their people. One striking example is the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country endowed with vast mineral wealth but plagued by poverty and conflict. After succeeding his assassinated father, Joseph Kabila, the former president of the DRC, partnered with Israeli businessman Dan Gertler. Gertler, through a web of offshore companies, acquired mining assets at bargain prices, amassing a fortune while the Congolese people saw little benefit. In Guinea, another resource-rich but impoverished nation, Israeli businessman Benny Steinmetz secured control of half the country's iron ore reserves through a series of opaque deals. Steinmetz allegedly bribed the wife of the dying president to secure these lucrative concessions, highlighting the brazen nature of resource grabbing in Africa. Angola, a major oil producer, presents another case study in resource curse dynamics. Sam Pa, a shadowy Chinese middleman, established China Sonangol, a joint venture with Angola's state energy company. This partnership facilitated the flow of Angolan oil to China, enriching a select few while doing little to alleviate poverty in Angola. Pa's operations extended beyond Angola as he forged similar deals with authoritarian leaders in Guinea and Zimbabwe, cementing his reputation as a key player in Africa's resource trade. These examples are not isolated incidents, but rather symptomatic of a broader pattern of corruption and exploitation that defines the resource curse. The individuals involved, often operating in the shadows, exploit weak institutions and a culture of impunity to enrich themselves at the expense of entire nations. State energy companies, often portrayed as vehicles for national development, frequently become instruments of the resource curse. Instead of managing resources for the benefit of their citizens, these companies are often riddled with corruption and mismanagement, serving as cash cows for corrupt elites and their cronies. Nigeria's NNPC, or Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, exemplifies this phenomenon. Despite being Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria suffers from widespread poverty and underdevelopment. The NNPC has been plagued by allegations of corruption and opacity, with billions of dollars in oil revenue unaccounted for. This lack of transparency and accountability has fueled public anger and hindered Nigeria's development. Angola's Sonangol, another state energy giant, has also been implicated in corrupt practices. In one egregious case, Sonangol awarded a lucrative oil field license to a company owned by its then chief executive Manuel Vicente and senior army officers. This blatant self-dealing highlights how state companies can be used to enrich a select few at the expense of the nation's wealth. These state energy companies often operate in collusion with multinational corporations, further perpetuating the resource curse. Western oil companies, eager to secure access to Africa's oil reserves, often turn a blind eye to corruption and human rights abuses. This complicity allows the looting machine to continue operating, enriching both corrupt elites and foreign corporations, while leaving ordinary Africans impoverished. Policies aimed at addressing the resource curse often fall short of their goals, sometimes even exacerbating existing inequalities. One such example is Black Economic Empowerment, or BE, in South Africa. Implemented after the end of apartheid, BE aimed to redress historical injustices by increasing black ownership and participation in the economy, particularly in resource-rich sectors. However, BE has been widely criticized for primarily benefiting a small elite connected to the ruling African National Congress. While some black South Africans have amassed considerable wealth through BE deals, the majority have seen little improvement in their lives. This has led to accusations that BE has created a new class of black elites while leaving many black South Africans disillusioned and economically marginalized. The Marikana massacre of 2012, where police gunned down striking miners at Lonmin's platinum mine, starkly illustrated the failures of BE. The striking miners, many of whom felt excluded from the benefits of BE, were demanding better wages and working conditions. The massacre highlighted the growing inequality and social unrest stemming from the uneven distribution of South Africa's mineral wealth. The BE experience demonstrates that simply transferring ownership of resources is insufficient to address the root causes of the resource curse. True empowerment requires addressing systemic issues such as poverty, inequality, and lack of access to education and opportunities. It also necessitates tackling corruption and ensuring that the benefits of resource wealth are shared equitably among all citizens. Section 5. The Global Web of Complicity, Capital Flight and the Demand for Resources. The resource curse is not just an African problem, it is a global issue. The demand for Africa's resources, particularly from developed countries, fuels the extractive industries that often operate with little regard for environmental and social consequences. This global demand creates a system of complicity that perpetuates the resource curse. Multinational corporations, driven by profit maximization, often employ accounting practices that minimize their tax liabilities in resource-rich countries. Transfer pricing, a method used to shift profits to low-tax jurisdictions, is one such practice that deprives African nations of much-needed revenue. This capital flight further exacerbates the resource curse, as governments are deprived of the financial resources needed to invest in education, healthcare and infrastructure. Furthermore, the liberalization of mining policies, often advocated by international financial institutions, has not always delivered the promised benefits. A World Bank report acknowledged that liberalized mining codes have often failed to translate into broad-based development in Africa. This highlights the need for a more nuanced approach to resource governance, one that prioritizes sustainable development and equitable benefit sharing. Ultimately, the responsibility for addressing the resource curse lies not only with African governments, but also with the international community. Developed countries must acknowledge their role in perpetuating the demand for resources and work towards promoting sustainable consumption patterns. They must also support efforts to strengthen governance, combat corruption, and ensure that the benefits of resource extraction are shared equitably. The rapid pace of resource extraction in many African countries poses a significant challenge to sustainable development. Unlike countries like Norway, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, which develop their resource sectors gradually, allowing for economic diversification and the development of necessary infrastructure, many African nations face a situation of too much, too soon. This rapid exploitation, driven by global demand and often facilitated by corrupt deals, prevents countries from adapting and developing the institutional and physical infrastructure needed to manage their resource wealth effectively. This often leads to mismanagement, corruption, and instability, further entrenching the resource curse. For example, the recent discoveries of oil, manganese, and gold in countries like Ghana and Equatorial Guinea have raised concerns about their ability to manage these newfound riches responsibly. The lack of adequate regulatory frameworks, coupled with weak institutions and a history of corruption, creates fertile ground for the resource curse to take hold. To avoid falling into the trap of rapid exploitation, African nations must prioritize long-term planning and sustainable development. This includes investing in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, diversifying their economies beyond extractive industries, and establishing strong institutions that can manage resource wealth transparently and accountably. As the world transitions towards a green energy future, the demand for critical minerals, many of which are abundant in Africa, is set to skyrocket. These minerals are essential for batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and other clean energy technologies. Africa, holding over 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves, is poised to play a crucial role in this transition. However, this new wave of resource extraction carries the risk of repeating the mistakes of the past. If not managed properly, the extraction of critical minerals could exacerbate existing inequalities, fuel conflict, and further degrade the environment. To avoid these pitfalls, a new paradigm for resource governance is essential, one that prioritizes sustainable development, community benefits, and environmental protection. International actors, particularly those seeking to secure access to Africa's critical minerals, have a responsibility to ensure that their investments do not contribute to the resource curse. This includes supporting anti-corruption efforts, promoting local content requirements, and fostering the development of regional value chains that benefit African economies. The future of Africa, and indeed the world, depends on breaking the cycle of the resource curse. By embracing sustainable and equitable resource management practices, Africa can harness its vast natural wealth to drive development, create jobs, and build a more prosperous and sustainable future for its people. Addressing the resource curse requires a multi-pronged approach that tackles both the symptoms and the root causes of the problem. At the heart of any solution lies the need for good governance, transparency, and accountability. Strengthening institutions is paramount. This includes promoting the rule of law, tackling corruption, and ensuring the independence of the judiciary. Governments must be held accountable for how they manage their resource wealth, and citizens must have a voice in decision-making processes. Transparency is crucial. Contracts between governments and extractive companies should be publicly available, and revenue flows from resource extraction should be disclosed in a clear and accessible manner. This will help to combat corruption and ensure that citizens can hold their leaders accountable for how their resources are managed. Furthermore, empowering local communities is essential. Communities affected by resource extraction should have a say in how projects are developed and should benefit directly from the revenues generated. This can be achieved through revenue sharing mechanisms, local content requirements, and the development of community development funds. International cooperation is also vital. Developed countries must support efforts to strengthen governance in resource-rich countries and crack down on illicit financial flows. They must also promote responsible business practices among their own companies operating in developing countries. Africa's vast natural resources have the potential to be a blessing, not a curse. By embracing a new paradigm of equitable and sustainable resource management, Africa can break the chains of the resource curse and unlock a brighter future for its people. This vision requires a fundamental shift in mindset from one of extraction and exploitation to one of stewardship and shared prosperity. It requires recognizing that natural resources are not merely commodities to be exploited, but rather assets to be managed for the benefit of current and future generations. It requires investing in human capital, diversifying economies, and creating a more equitable distribution of wealth. It requires empowering local communities, promoting transparency and accountability, and ensuring that the benefits of resource extraction are shared widely. Ultimately, it requires a collective effort from governments, businesses, civil society, and international partners to create a future where Africa's natural wealth is a source of prosperity, not poverty, a driver of development, not conflict, and a legacy of hope, not despair.